What is going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel, and today we're going to be kickstarting a brand new series on the channel where I'm going to be breaking down each and every weapon in Battlefield 2042, providing you guys with all the stats you need to know, as well as a bunch of useful tips and tricks. And as I'm sure you can tell by the title, we're going to be starting off today with the M5A3. In these weapon breakdowns, we're going to go through a bunch of stats that you guys need to know, such as rounds per minute, reload time for both tactical reload and the empty reload, bullet velocity, damage over distance, bullets to kill over distance, and time to kill over distance as well. On top of those stats, we'll then go over the recoil pattern for each weapon, and then lastly I'll go over 3 unique loadouts that I've crafted for specific playstyles, for those of you guys who aren't 100% sure on which attachments to use. So as you can see, I've tried to go as in-depth as I possibly can, and hopefully this series helps you guys out when it comes to better understanding the weapons in Battlefield 2042. Before we get into it, guys, there was a ton of effort put into this video, and so if you do end up enjoying it, I would love it if you guys could hit that like button to help the channel out. And if you guys are new and you're after more content like this surrounding Battlefield 2042, then definitely hit that subscribe button and turn on those notifications, as there are plenty more videos like this one on the way. With that being said though, guys, let's get stuck right into my weapon breakdown for the M5A3. So the M5A3 is obviously classed as an assault rifle, and this is one of the weapons that you actually have unlocked when you first fire up the game, which is actually why I thought I would cover this one first. It has a magazine size of 30+1 in the chamber, and it fires at a rate of 749 rounds per minute, which is what you would consider to be a pretty regular rate of fire. Now, for its reload times, it takes 2.4 seconds for a tactical reload, which is when you manually reload it, or it has an empty reload time of 2.3 seconds, which is when it automatically reloads after running out of bullets. Now, that seems to be a bug. Most weapons reload much faster when you manually reload it compared to the empty reload, but for some reason with the M5A3, it is actually faster for an empty reload. So yeah, I assume that's a bug, but I'm not actually 100% sure. As for the velocity, it sends ammunition down range at 600 meters per second, which is actually the slowest out of all the assault rifles currently in the game, and the LMGs too, but only by a little bit in most cases, so it's almost on par with those other weapons. Now, getting into the more detailed stats for the M5A3, and keep in mind that all these values are based off of body shots, and when it comes to the assault rifles, headshots have a 2-time multiplier, so any value that you guys see in these graphs are just doubled when you land them to the head rather than the torso or the limbs. The M5A3 deals 22 damage per bullet up to 19 meters, then between 20 and 49 meters it drops down to 18 damage per shot, and then at 50 meters and beyond it drops down to 15 damage per shot. So it has a relatively smooth drop off there, which is probably what you would expect for essentially a jack of all trades type of weapon. As for the bullets it takes to kill over distance, and again keep in mind these are just body shot stats here, headshots will reduce this even further. It takes 5 shots to kill up until that 19 meter mark. Between 20 and 49 meters it'll take 6 shots to kill, and then at 50 meters or beyond it'll take 7 shots to kill. Lastly, moving on to the time to kill over distance, it kills in 320 milliseconds up to 19 meters, then 400 milliseconds between 20 and 49 meters, and from 50 meters and beyond it will take 480 milliseconds to kill. Again, just keep in mind these are all body shot values. I did consider trying to implement headshot values as well, however that does just open a whole can of worms, because there's so many different combinations in terms of, you know, how many headshots you hit, whether you miss any shots in general. There are just a million variations there, and I personally feel it does become a bit too confusing when there's so many values on your screen. With this being the first breakdown here on the channel though, be sure to leave some feedback on what you guys do or don't want in these videos. I've tried to cover the most important stats in what I think is the easiest way to digest all this information, but you guys know what you want to see from these breakdowns, so like I said, definitely leave some feedback down in the comments. Now, moving on, we have the recoil pattern for the M5A3, and as you can see, it is a relatively simple pattern compared to a lot of other weapons. It essentially just recoils vertically and slightly to the right, so it barely has any horizontal recoil at all, and obviously vertical recoil is relatively easy to manage, so the recoil on this weapon in general is pretty decent. This is actually just the factory M5A3 that I'm showing here. I am actually making a video later this week though, just to sort of test out the different underbarrel attachments such as the different types of grips, to further explain how they affect your weapon and its recoil. So keep an eye out for that one, and obviously moving forward that video can be used as a reference for any of these weapon breakdowns as well. Now, moving on, like I mentioned, I've actually crafted 3 different loadouts that I often like to use on the M5A3 depending on the mode or the map, or just how I feel like playing in general. So if you're not 100% sure on what attachments to use, then hopefully this can give you guys a good starting point, and obviously these can be slightly altered and adjusted to your own preferences, so these are by no means set in stone. Also keep in mind that you can obviously bring 3 attachments per slot in the plus system, and in these loadouts I'm only going to be showing 1 attachment per slot, so technically you can bring all 3 of these loadouts along and change them on the fly, or like I said, you can chop and and change them once you guys get a better idea of what you personally prefer. Now, the first loadout that I wanted to cover is what I like to call the close quarters build, and this is actually the loadout that I generally use about 80% of the time with the M5A3. Most of the gameplay in the background of this video has probably been using this exact same loadout. The M5A3 is kind of a jack of all trades type of weapon, meaning it technically isn't really the best in any one area, yet I do think it is definitely best in more close to mid-range type of engagements, so personally I think this is one of the better loadouts for the weapon. For the sight I use the Fusion Hollow simply because it's the one that I like the best, and I think it gives a nice clear view of your surroundings when you aim down sights. For the ammo I use the close combat rounds, which slightly reduces the effectiveness at range, while increasing the rate of fire, lowering the recoil and reducing the reload speed, and they are also 35 round magazines as well, so you do get a few extra bullets in there with that. For the underbarrel I use the Rattlesnake light grip, which improves your accuracy while you're moving at the cost of accuracy while you're static, but obviously in close quarters battles you're going to be moving it more often than not. Lastly, for the barrel I use the shortened barrel, which actually increases the rate of fire once again at the cost of a slightly slower bullet velocity, but obviously that doesn't really matter too much for close to mid range. Like I said, this build is personally my favourite build for the M5A3, and I do think it is one of the best loadouts that you guys can use, so definitely get out there and give this one a try, using it almost more like an SMG that has some decent range rather than like a typical assault rifle. Now, moving on to the second loadout I wanted to cover, this one is called the laser beam, and that is because this is purely built for accuracy over anything else. For the sight I use the Fusion Hollow again, simply for the same reasons that I mentioned before. For the ammo I use the subsonic rounds, as they seem to give the M5A3 the least amount of recoil, not that I think they're actually meant to, but they seem to do so according to the stats and some testing as well. For the underbarrel I use the Cobra grip, which does essentially the opposite of the Rattlesnake. It reduces recoil while you're static, while increasing it on the move, and so this build is made to be used when you're stationary more often than not, as that will allow for much more accurate shooting. Lastly, for the barrel I use the Champion muzzle brake, which just reduces the vertical recoil of the weapon overall. Like I said, this build is purely for accuracy. It won't hit quite as hard as some other builds, but from what I tested anyway, this seems to give the weapon the most accuracy overall. Now, lastly, for the third loadout, this is what I call the long range build, and obviously this one is designed to maximize the M5A3 at long range. To be completely honest, if I'm playing at long range, I'm going to be using something other than the M5A3, but for those who just really love this weapon, I thought I would give you guys some pointers for using it at those longer ranges anyway. For the sight, I use the TV 2x scope for that added range. Anything more zoomed in than this gives me too much visual recoil personally, but you can obviously swap this out for something even more zoomed in if that's what you guys prefer. For the ammo, I use the high power rounds, which just increase the damage over distance, meaning that 22 damage per shot lasts up to 49 meters, and then after 50 meters it deals 18 damage rather than 15, but it does come at the cost of a slower rate of fire and more recoil, so be sure to tap the trigger or even use a single fire mode instead. For the underbarrel, I use the Cobra grip again. Personally, I do prefer the Rattlesnake, but in this situation at long range, I feel as though the Cobra grip is a better option for accuracy, but just give both of those a try and you can obviously switch between them on the go anyway. Lastly, for the barrel, I use the extended barrel, which just increases the velocity of the weapon at the cost of a slower rate of fire. Like I said, this build is purely for range. It won't really be very handy at all up close, but it can definitely slap at long range compared to the factory M5 anyway. So that is pretty much it for the M5A3, guys. Personally, I really enjoy using this one, and it's one of the weapons that I've used the most so far in all my playtime. Like I said, it is definitely the jack of all trades type of weapon. It's not really dominant in any single aspect, but it can pretty much be decent in any given situation. So I do think this is the type of weapon that is great to start out with if you're a bit newer to the game. Like I said earlier, guys, with this one being the first weapon breakdown on the channel, definitely feel free to leave some feedback. Let me know what you guys want to see in the future episodes, and I'll do my best to improve this series as I go through all of the other weapons in the game, and most likely even some updated versions, as no doubt there will be plenty of buffs and nerfs in the future. If you enjoyed the video, then be sure to leave a like down below, and if you are new, then consider subscribing to the channel with those notifications on. If you guys want to support the content that I make here on YouTube, then consider becoming a channel member. But with that being said, thank you all very much for watching. You guys have a great day, and I'll see you all out there on the battlefield.